My name is Jonathan Crane, and I grew up hearing stories from my dad, Mike, and my grandpa, Henry. Out of all their hunting tales, one always stood out, the strange event they experienced on a hunting trip back in 1983. My dad told it so vividly you'd swear he was reliving it. That year my dad was 16, and it was his first big hunting trip with Grandpa into the hills of southern Idaho. The area was remote, no people, just rolling hills covered in dry grass and shrubs. The forest didn't start until you got closer to the mountains, and the valley stretched out like endless green carpets between the hills. They set up camp in one of those valleys, surrounded by hills, planning to climb higher the next morning to start hunting. Early in the morning, around 3 a.m., Dad and Grandpa crawled out of their tents, wrapped themselves in jackets, and grabbed their backpacks. The cold cut right through them, but the sky was so clear and the moon so bright, they could see almost like it was daytime. Even as they moved further away, the outlines of their camp were still easy to make out. We'd been walking for about 20 minutes when I glanced back at the camp, Dad used to say. I thought I'd just see the tents and the fire pit, but I saw something else entirely. Where their camp was, lit by moonlight, something unexplainable was happening. Translucent shadows, like thick smoke, were moving around. Their shapes kept shifting, sometimes thin and stretched, sometimes spreading out like mist. At first, Dad thought it was some kind of mirage or fog, but the way those shadows moved was too deliberate. They weren't just swaying, they were moving with purpose, almost like they were investigating the camp. Every now and then, one of the shadows would stretch upward, rising several meters high before disappearing, almost like it dissolved into the air. I was about to ask Grandpa what it was, Dad said, but he suddenly put his hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Keep walking, don't stop." They kept going up the hill, but Dad couldn't stop glancing back. The shadows started clustering together, their movements becoming more coordinated. It felt like they were searching for something in the camp. Fear was clawing at Dad, but Grandpa stayed calm. When they finally reached the top of the hill, Henry came to an abrupt halt. "Get under the brush," Grandpa ordered, and they both crawled into some thick grass. Grandpa pulled out his old binoculars, wiped the lenses with his sleeve, and began watching what was happening. I could hear his breathing get heavier, Dad recalled, but he didn't say a word, and I was too scared to ask. Through the binoculars, the shadows looked even stranger. They resembled translucent tentacles, flickering in and out of existence. Sometimes one of them seemed to peek out from another dimension, its edges sharpening for a split second before blurring again. For a moment, I swear one of them looked right at us, Dad said. It froze, tilted forward like a predator, locking onto prey. They kept watching for what felt like an hour. At one point, a shadow moved close to the fire pit, which had almost burned out, and suddenly, the whole area around it lit up with a cold, eerie glow. The shadows seemed to absorb the light, growing brighter and larger. When the first rays of sunlight broke over the hills, everything changed. A piercing, high-pitched sound, like metal screeching, echoed from the valley. It was so loud, Dad had to cover his ears. The shadows froze, then began disappearing one by one, as if evaporating into the morning air. The last one rose high into the sky, blending with the sunlight. When it was finally quiet, Grandpa said, "Stay down." We wait. They stayed hidden in the brush for another 2 hours until the sun was high enough to flood the valley with light. When they finally made their way back to the camp, it looked like a tornado had ripped through it. Gear was scattered everywhere. Pots, clothes, even their sleeping bags were tossed around. But nothing was missing. It didn't look like animals had been there. It was as if someone, or something, had gone through their things and found nothing worth taking. Grandpa just said, "We're leaving now," Dad remembered. He didn't let me argue or ask questions. He just made me pack up and move. They left the valley and never went back. Grandpa, who was usually calm and collected, started calling that place the Devil's Hole and refused to talk about it. Dad, on the other hand, told the story often, but he always ended it the same way. I still don't know what it was, but it was something I'd never seen before. This story still lives on in our family. Every time I hear it, I find myself wondering, what were those shadows? Were they living creatures, a natural phenomenon, or something beyond our understanding? Sometimes I think there are mysteries better left unsolved.